So after yesterday, trying to go through my thoughts and convince other people as much as myself that talking about the stock market on a day-to-day basis when we get in times like this with a lot of volatility is a waste of time. You need to look beyond that because yes, while the stock market is important because that drives consumer sentiment and that really has been propping up our economy for the last 10 years, just trying to spin your wheels to explain the day-to-day stuff like they do on, say CNBC, is just a waste of time. So today, I'm going to get back to basics talking about the Wu flu and how that is affecting our economy. Because, I think that every day, as the results of how many cases are coming in, because now we've just crossed the 100,000 mark, which of course in reality is much higher because there's plenty of people who haven't been tested, and of course we don't know how many people in China actually have it. I think most people recognize at this point that the China numbers are totally bogus, and so they have a lot more than they're saying. So we've probably been well over 100,000 for a long time, but the headline rate is what matters as far as sentiment is concerned. And now people are waking up, turning on the news, and seeing that there are 100,000 cases of the Wu flu in the world. This is, of course, incredibly higher in number than SARS or MERS or Ebola or any of those other things that got a lot of media attention a few years ago. And so as this drags on, it's going to start impacting people's behavior. And that really is what the Fed is concerned about. I talked earlier this week about how, the Fed, with their half a point rate cut, their 50 basis point rate cut, the biggest rate cut since the financial crisis, is trying to instill confidence in not just financial markets, not just in the stock market, but in ordinary consumers. Because, while it is fair to point out how the Fed really is overly concerned with Wall Street, and it looks like they're just trying to, make Wall Street lives easier and they don't care about the rest of us, and while I do agree with that to a certain extent, they are indirectly, through their actions, trying to affect the mentality and the health of ordinary consumers and business owners on, Main Street, to use the cliche. And, the reason I say this is that ordinary people, just as even if they don't claim they don't care about the stock market, just mentally, because it's in the news every day, the health of the stock market to people does greatly affect their economic behavior. When the stock market is doing well, they feel like they are probably doing well, like they can spend a little more than they otherwise would, that they don't need to save so much, and likewise business owners feel like, hey, maybe I can make some more investments now than I otherwise would, because things are going pretty well right now. So I'm feeling confident. That's what it does. The stock market builds confidence. So even though, a Fed rate cut isn't going to do anything to make anybody on Main Street feel better, if the Fed rate cut is able to stop the sell-off in the stock market and therefore instill confidence in ordinary people, the Fed would be able to theoretically limit the impact of the Wu flu on the economy. Now, this only happens as far as the Fed being able to save the stock market and therefore save people from feeling bad about the economy and thus reverting back to their normal behavior. This only works if there's really no other news impacting people's sentiments other than that. Because the fact of the matter is that the stock market, I don't think at this point is the biggest is having the biggest effect on people's sentiments as far as everything in the news is concerned, because the news about the Wu flu, about the coronavirus, is so bad and is so ubiquitous now. You have ordinary people worrying about the Wu flu who never think about the stock market. You have people talking about it in the streets when folks never talk about the stock market. This has become a bigger story than the stock market, and so therefore the impact that it is having on sentiments is being felt more broadly than just through the stock market. It is impacting people directly, and so to the extent that people are, spending less money and maybe stocking up on staple foods and are being a little more careful in their lives and not going out so much and not going to see so many movies because they don't want to be in densely crowded areas where there might be koofers hiding amongst them who could spread the Wu flu. to the extent that this is not because of the stock market that they're concerned about, but because they're actually concerned about the virus, the Fed's actions will have no impact on the overall economy. So, in other words, by cutting rates by 50 basis points, you don't make anyone less afraid that they're going to get sick if that's their fear. If their fear is just that, oh my gosh, the stock market's not doing well, so maybe the economy is not in such great shape, I should tighten my belt, then the Fed can have an impact. But the worse this gets, like I said, I think that the focus of people will shift from the stock market to the virus itself, and I think we're already past that point. I think we are to the point to where, it is the stock market is not front running the news, and they certainly aren't doing that. Again, a lot of these Wall Street apologists, these whiz kids on FinTwit, like to say that, oh my God, the stock market, it's a leading indicator, because Wall Street is so far ahead of the curve because you've got all these smart people all trading stocks. And that's just not the case. Wall Street was way behind the curve. I pointed this out yesterday. So you can't look at them as being, the masters of information. The price of stocks is always an indication of economic fantasy, not economic reality. Now, someone I haven't mentioned yet today is President Donald Trump and, of course, Vice President Mike Pence, who have been getting a lot of questions lately about the Wu flu and about the impact it's going to have on the United States. And you know that no one in this country perhaps is more influenced by the day-to-day moves in the stock market than President Trump. And he's been criticized by people for trying to downplay the Wu flu, for trying to say that, hey, it's not so bad, you don't need to worry about it and all this stuff without, and then being somewhat negligent as far as, the CDC, which is underneath him, is concerned, being able to produce a decent amount of test kits so that folks, who may have this virus, who are exhibiting symptoms, can be tested. And of course, plenty more people than those who are just symptomatic have the virus. Only something like 16% or so of folks are going to get sick enough to where they actually have to go into the hospital. But even those people right now are not being tested. And this is, largely for two reasons. One of them you can blame on Trump as pure negligence and not necessarily malice because of, actually, not Trump, I shouldn't say, because this is on the CDC. This doesn't necessarily have to do with their budget. A lot of people are blaming, saying that the CDC's poor response to this is because they had their budget cut. I don't necessarily know that's the case because it's not that they weren't able to produce the test kits and then ship them out. They did do that, but they didn't work. And so that was our first problem. The second problem, the one that you can tie, that is the completely deliberate problem in the response to this virus and in trying to get a grasp on just truly what the impact of it will be, is that the CDC, as I've said in the past, has been very restrictive on who they want tested. They do not want a very broad range of people being tested. The CDC's response is the exact opposite of the response in South Korea, in which South Korea, they said, hey, anyone who possibly might have this, let's test them so that we can get them in isolation and so that we can stop the spread of this. The CDC is not doing that. The CDC is letting this virus run wild to the point to where they're not even willing to test people who are sick and who the doctors say, hey, they tested negative for influenza, yet they have all these flu-like symptoms and viral pneumonia, and you won't let me perform the test. Earlier this week, we literally had a doctor on CNBC begging the CDC, hey, I've got X amount of patients in my hospital that I know have this virus, but I can't test them. And then, so that's on the CDC side. Then on the White House side, you've got President Trump downplaying this all the time to the media. And you've got him creating this task force, so-called, headed by Mike Pence, in which anyone who in the government who's going to speak about the Wu flu publicly has to run all their communications through the office of Mike Pence, to make sure that they're properly censored so that it doesn't, give any hint of the truth to people. And so with all this stuff considered, it seems to me like the White House is taking more of a Chinese approach here, to where they're acknowledging that the outbreak exists, but they're trying to suppress the numbers as much as possible. it is in a sense, a soft cover-up, because they're not completely hiding. They're not saying there are no Wu flu cases in America. They're just trying to tremendously understate the extent to which this virus has spread. But the more that they do that, the more that they allow it to get out and to get worse. And my guess is that President Trump is taking this tact because he's so concerned about the stock market, because he's trying to stop the sell-off, and he understands that if he acknowledges the extent to which this outbreak is really, having an impact, and to the extent to which the virus has already spread, that it will lead to an even steeper sell-off before the election. Now, I think that even if he continues this strategy of trying to make this virus seem like it's less of a problem than it actually is, that that will come back to bite him well before the election. I think that this virus seems to spread way too fast for you to try and kick the can down the road as far as this is concerned. It's just going to spread to such a point that it cannot be denied anymore. And of course, even putting supply chain problems aside, which I've discussed in the past, the more that people realize the gravity of the situation here, the more it will impact individual decision making, the more people will refrain from consuming in certain ways, the more businesses will refrain from investing, the more that a Wu flu inspired recession becomes inevitable. And of course, if that happens, what can be done other than the Fed printing money and throwing more money at the problem? That's all they know how to do. But that's just, frankly, as I've been saying before the Wu flu ever happened, the Fed is out of ammo. They're not going to be able to do that this time. So I think our economic prospects moving forward are still remain grim. So if you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.